Okay, good evening, everybody. It is 5:32. I'm Tiffany Edwards. I am the current chair of the EETAC. And it is June 17th. And we are here. So I'm going to call this meeting to order if I haven't already. Welcome, everybody. Glad you could be here. I know it's really nice outside, so hopefully you're not distracted by the gorgeous sunshine outside. Let's see. So welcome and introduction. Do we need to do introductions? We all know each other, right? We've got our names on there. We've all been meeting for over a year now, so a couple years. So let's agenda review. Does anybody have anything to add or comment about on the agenda for today? I'm going to pull it up. I just got it up, but I can't find it now. I'm sorry, you guys. Okay.
The main agenda item is just talking about the buildable lands inventory. That's our only item after standing items. So.
Okay. So, but I know that we did have just the Zoom protocol that we generally go over, which is basically, I think we try not to use the chat function because that's a public record that is not able for the public to access. So, and I guess as protocol, we're just gonna, raise your hand if you want to speak and be in the queue. I will pull that up so I can watch that. Okay, so I think then we're ready to approve the minutes from last week or last meeting. Does anybody have any comments or changes to add for anything that they need to update on the minutes? No?
I move approval.
Okay, thank you, Sue. Can I get a second?
Ed seconds.
Right. Motion by Sue Pritchett and seconded by Ed, and all those in favor, go ahead and raise your real hand or your virtual hand. I guess it doesn't matter. Okay. All those opposed? And any abstentions? All right, thanks, Jennifer.
And then Alexis is in the meeting, but he's doing something else at the moment, I think. Or
I just got home.
Okay, do you approve the 6-3 minutes?
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, and I just want to mention, I'm going to turn off my video just briefly to go downstairs and get some water. I'm taking my laptop with me.
Thank you, Lisa, for not making us dizzy. Okay. Well, I think we'll probably just get right into the main topic for this evening, which is the BLI developable draft land supply map. Heather, are you leading us through that? I apologize. I still can't find the agenda.
Oh, that's okay. Thea is. Thea, do you want me to set the stage, or were you planning on doing that? Okay. So I know last time we went for a short turnaround on looking at the buildable lands inventory. Part of it is our schedule, which I talked about last time, and trying to get everything, get a draft report this summer and get it to council by the end of the year. I totally recognize, like I said last time, that 2 weeks is pretty short. On the other hand, leaving it for a month felt like there could end up being more questions rather than when it's all kind of fresh in your mind. So, so what I think we were thinking we would do today is, some of you have sent in questions in some cases, we've been able to answer them. We did just get some today, which I think you all were copied on from Kevin. And then what I was thinking we would do is just maybe start and just go around the virtual room, and everybody who has a question gives everybody the opportunity to ask one question. And then if somebody else has a question that's related to that specific issue, then we can jump to that person, but otherwise just kind of going around.
Okay.
Some of you may not have questions, some of you may have more. And then at the end, I'd like to take a step back and just talk about how we could proceed for next steps, whether that means we need more time, if we have some ideas out of this meeting that would help us clean things up some more, then staff can go forward with those things. So I think I'd like to leave at least maybe 15 to 20 minutes at the end to just kind of take stock of where we're at and what that looks like going forward. But other than that, it is Thea is in the driver's seat, and we can, if Thea, if you have anything else you wanted to mention, and then maybe we can just start a queue of questions by raising your hand feature.
Okay, Thea, I'll let you respond, but if folks want, I can do one of two things. I can just call on you as I see you in my little squares, if that's easier, and we can just kind of go around, and that way, you know, you don't have to raise your hand. We'll just call on you. And if you have questions or whatever, and then if you have a follow-up question, so say somebody has a comment and you made you think of a question, then raise your hand and then I'll come back to you. So if that works, we can do it that way. Thea, did you have anything to share before I start my round robin here?
I just wanted to say big thank you to everyone for looking at the map and going over specific plots, you know, taking time out of your busy schedules to do that. We really appreciate it. And you all have keen eyes and found some great oversights looking at this. So thank you.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'm impressed because I didn't find a whole lot of any oversights, but I did have a couple comments to some things, but I'll save it because I'll let you all go first. So I'm going to start with Howard because he's the closest to me. So Howard, why don't you go ahead and share any kind of comments or questions?
Okay, well, as we previously remarked, you know, the amount of data and information and how it's presented is outstanding. I did kind of spot checking, but not being in the land development business, you know, I was not sure I could provide a lot of comments. I didn't see anything that jumped out at me. I guess for the next step, I guess I would ask the question of, is there going to be a more, for lack of better terms, organized, deliberative approach to assessing properties to determine whether the buildable acreage is accurate or not? I mean, it didn't seem very efficient for all of us just to be kind of mousing around, if you will, and you know, checking things and seeing if anything jumped out. So it seems to me that there needs to be a little bit more of a deliberative approach, maybe, you know, taking certain sections of the city at a time, or the, you know, urban growth boundary, or no, excuse me, the city, and just trying to determine, you know, if there's anything that needs to be adjusted.
Great. Next, I have John Borofsky.
Thea, could you pull up the map? I've got a question on a specific property, and I don't know if I was like reading it right or whatever, but maybe you could walk me through a specific property. Is that something we could do as a question?
Definitely. Where would you like me to point them at?
2081 Fairmont Boulevard.
All right.
Probably your house, isn't it?
It's near me, and it's a couple lots that on one of my neighbor's house, and they're connecting, but the second part of it didn't really come up as developable, and I'm just wondering why. So yeah, so those two lots, if you click on that one there, no, the other one, yeah, that one there that your cursor's over. So that's kind of a back orchard to one of my neighbor's houses, as you can see. There's a garage on it. Now, does this say that that would be undevelopable? Is that the way that I'm reading that?
It does say that according to the assessor, it was undeveloped and had no improvement value. However, it was flagged for manual review because it does have a building on it.
Okay.
And so during the manual review, staff said that it contains an unaddressed garage and that
Yeah.
the improvement value for that building is assigned to the adjacent lot because they're the same owner. So it was overridden to developed. And because it's not above the threshold amount for it to be considered partially vacant, which is 1 acre for low density residential, it was not eligible for partially vacant, and so it remained developed.
Okay, so it has to be over 1 acre to be partially vacant. Is that was the criteria?
For low density residential, yes.
Okay, because I read somewhere that if it was over 4,500 square feet, but that may, okay,
Yeah, so that's a really good point, and that's a second threshold for partially vacant. So essentially, that's 4,500 square feet is the threshold for the. Let me take a step back. If this one were over an acre and it was low density residential, it would be eligible for partially vacant if it had at least 4,500 square feet of buildable land.
okay. All right, yeah, that was my question, because I saw the two corresponding things and I wasn't sure. But yet I see this piece of property and see quite a bit of acreage that, I mean, I'm familiar with it, so I know that you could put 3 houses on that piece of property without a problem, but yet it's considered developed.
And I think it's a good point, and it's worth acknowledging that could another house go here? Potentially, but we're not saying that we're banking on that for the future. And Heather can say it more eloquently in reference to
Yeah,
the state.
yeah, if I can jump in. Or what I would just add to that, I'll take down my hand. I wasn't sure if you could see that, Tiffany.
I'm looking.
Okay. So there's a difference between capacity that we identify on land that we consider partially vacant and land that is too small to meet our threshold for partially vacant, but that might have some infill or redevelopment capacity. And so the state requirements require that we actually map, like identify the lots that we're counting on for partially vacant capacity. So like Thea said, if this lot was over an acre over, and that back area was at least 4,500 square feet, which is our lot size, our minimum lot size in low density residential, then we would map it as partially vacant. But redevelopment and kind of smaller infill also happens. We just don't have to map it for kind of, I don't know if it's sensitive reasons, but one of the things that I would say is, with redevelopment, a lot of times you're talking about demoing something on somebody would demo something on their property and then replace it with with additional dwellings. And so we don't really want to map that. And redevelopment's trickier than saying, look, this is a large lot that has some development on it, but there's clearly a vacant area behind it. And so that's what we're doing right now, is focusing on what is vacant and what is initially identified as developed, but actually has partially vacant capacity. And then when we get to capacity analysis, we will make some assumptions about redevelopment. It just won't be, we don't have to map what sites we think are going to redevelop. So we see land divisions on smaller lots, less than an acre. We see some housing come in on smaller lots, less than an acre. And so we will be making some assumptions that those will continue. And we did that in Envision Eugene. So that will come from our building permit information.
Okay, so what, and I think that this is just something that will need to be made clear going forward, was we chose that 1 acre benchmark. That was something that we gave you guys direction to do. That didn't come from the state, right? We kind of, as ETAC, we kind of said, what is our low ceiling on what we want to look at, correct?
Yeah, we just brought that forward from Envision Eugene, and that was from looking at really looking at land division applications and seeing when they started to taper off based on lot size. And so 1 acre, and then also looking at building permits. And so lots that were about an acre or greater often divided and added units. And then lots that were less than an acre, we saw much less infill. But again, we still did make a redevelopment assumption for those lots, or not for those lots, but for the next 20 years.
Okay, so yeah, that's helpful. It kind of will be able to answer questions to people when they say, well, there's a lot over there that you can put 3 houses on. How come you didn't count that? And it's because we had these metrics that we felt comfortable with moving forward. So thank you.
Thanks, John. So I'm going to jump in because I do have a question. One of my questions is kind of on that vein, so I just figured it was appropriate to ask. But I'm curious because I didn't see, other than if you go into the individual lots, there is, and maybe I'm even missing that, but so a lot of the areas like in Santa Clara and, areas where you have county lots that are larger, I bring this up because there's an actual lot right behind me. It's in the county, but they're annexing it and they're making 2 lots, 2 city lots out of 1 county lot. So I was just curious if there is anywhere that might be factored into the inventory in the future. Because if somebody wants to build on something, they would have to annex it into the city if they're in the county and they want to, like, that's why these guys are having to bring it in, because they wanted to add a structure. And so they're making 2 lots. And I'm just kind of curious as to whether or not that is recorded anywhere in this process or assessed. Does that make sense? With all those county lots that are larger than 2 city lots, are those being looked at as partially developed?
We don't look at whether or not it's annexed when we assume capacity or not. We're looking at all land that's inside the urban growth boundary. So regardless of whether or not it's annexed, we're doing the same analysis of whether or not it's meets the partially vacant threshold and thresholds like Theo was saying. So we don't worry about that, because the assumption is, if it's inside the urban growth boundary, that it is supposed to develop over time. So we want to make sure we count that land.
Okay, that answers my question. All right. So next in my little Hollywood squares, I have Sue Pritchard.
Okay, well, when I looked at this map and started pulling up specific properties, I was astonished at the amount of detail. It's really incredible how detailed this work is and how specific it is to each individual property. And I think that's kind of amazing. I've been out of town most of the week, so I only spent a little bit of time, unfortunately, on it. But I was most concerned, of course, about things that were in my neighborhood that I'm familiar with. So that was where I started. And I identified a few places that I had questions. And when I got home late this afternoon from Central Oregon, I went driving around to look at them real quickly to make sure that I understood what they all are. And so again, just the amount of work getting to this point, I can't believe it. I have a couple of questions. One is about discrepancies in reality, between reality and maps. When it comes to things like alleys, there are a lot of alleys in my neighborhood. I live in the university neighborhood. I live, south of 24th, just a couple blocks, and by Laurelwood Golf Course. There are lots of alleys in my neighborhood. Some of them are dead end, but they show on a map as going all the way through. So some of these lots, a few lots show as if they have access, but in fact they're landlocked. And so there are questions I have about a few things like that. And then in many cases, or in some cases anyway, in my neighborhood, I'm curious about the ownership discrepancy between who's next to it and this vacant area, and the implications of that. I realize that it doesn't change our metrics in terms of determining availability, but it might, when it comes to actual on the ground, what happens with development, it might have an impact to know how the ownership is related to the people who are next door to it. So for instance, a few of the lots that I checked out today, they're clearly lots that are being used for gardens or for play area that are owned by the property owner next door. So they're not just random vacant lots unowned. And that has an implication, I think, for whether it's developed fully or whether it's developed with just an ADU for a grandparent. So those are implications that I think will be interesting to watch as we do the growth monitoring over time. But mostly, I just have to say, I think this work is unbelievable. And the detail level is really astonishing. And I don't have any arguments with it.
Thanks, Sue. Next up is Jennifer Yeh.
I actually respond to a piece of what Sue was talking about.
Oh, please. Sorry, Thea, go ahead.
Oh, no, that's fine. So Sue had actually sent me the lots that she was looking at earlier, and there's one in particular that I wanted to point out because it's a great example of that interior lot scenario. So it's this one right here, and we have classified as undeveloped. It has an accessory structure less than $1,000 in improvement value. And several other people pointed this out when they were emailing me with questions. And I think it's important to talk about. So this is classified as undeveloped, but the size of it is actually below the minimum lot size for residential. So for low density residential, we wouldn't be counting capacity on lots that are below 4,500 square feet, and which is about 0.1 acres. So this still is classified as undeveloped, and so are those other, there's a few other strange lots that you'll see that are interior lots or oddly shaped lots. But it's important to note that just because it says it's undeveloped doesn't necessarily mean that we're calculating housing going on to that particular lot.
Right. Thank you.
All right, sorry, Jennifer, I jumped the
No.
gun, but you're
No problem.
up.
No problem. I appreciated what Thea had to say. So I think that was pretty interesting. It's kind of like, okay, I thought that's what it was, but it's nice to hear. So I don't have any specific questions, although I enjoyed John's. I thought it's always good to get back up for what you thought. And the map, as always, was fun, extremely fun to click on things and see all the information. And like Sue said, it's just so much information in there. It was very impressive. I'm very impressed. Maybe I should have gone to GIS or whatever it is you do, Thea, because it's amazing.
All right. We'll go to Ed McMahon.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to first agree with Sue on the detail of this, and then also admit that I'm still learning how to use it all. There's so much, and it's really great work. And I too kind of have been able to check my neighborhood in the area that I live in, and had 7 or 8 concerns, and had a phone call with Thea earlier today, and found one minor adjustment and have a far better understanding of what's going on, and realizing that all the yellow on the map isn't the total undeveloped just because of samples like we just looked at. And same thing with partially vacant. So right now I'm impressed, but one point that I'd very much like to make is I do have a membership that looks at this vacant land as a profession. And I would very much appreciate more time to get this out to the membership and have them review it. I would hope that that wouldn't be that much of a burden, because unless there was proof that it was something different than how it's classified, it wouldn't change the map. So it seems to me like maybe they could trickle in. I don't know. But just putting that out there, would like for you to consider it. That's it.
Any thoughts from Thea or Heather?
I mean, we did this last time with the TRG. I think the technical resource group that we had before the EETAC, and Ed, I think you brought in Roxy Quaylar, and it was great. I mean, we just went through those questions. We actually, in those times, were able to have a map room where everybody came in and looked at printed maps. But I actually think this is really helpful because you can actually click on each lot and see the data associated with it. We couldn't really do that before. We had to have it queried, and it just took a lot longer. And I think as a result, we probably missed more things in the last buildable lands inventory. Yeah, I think that's great if you have some folks that you want to look at it. We do have, some pretty specific parameters that we're using, like that 1 acre threshold for partially vacant and things like that, that might be frustrating and definitely not intuitive, especially to folks that are not involved in the level of detail that you all are. We can talk more about the implications to timeline at the end, if that makes sense for you, Ed, because I'm sure you're not the only one that would like more time. I think we did hear that from Phil Farrington as well, was interested in having some more time. So, but thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move on to Alexis. You're up.
Cool. Thank you, Tiffany. And actually, John's question really captured one of the ones that I was interested in asking, so that's great. One thing I would like to go back to, and this might be one that just is tabled for later, but Tiffany brought up at the end of the last meeting that when I reviewed the last meeting, I wasn't there, but I think she was referring to Senate Bill 458, which allows the partition of middle housing. And I know that that's not in effect yet. But given that it will be, I actually don't know the effective date of the legislation, but it will be within, I would imagine, a year or two. And I wonder if we can revisit this when that is in effect.
That makes sense. So just as a reminder, we don't think that this is going to be the BLI that we're going to adopt for the next round. This is kind of bringing our BLI up to speed or up to date as of January 1. Dealing with the fact that we have new data layers that we didn't have before. But I think that House Bill 2001, I anticipate will have new code provisions, or hopefully, or maybe we'll be close by the time we rerun this again. And then hopefully we'll have more information about that House Bill and anything else, you know, that is adopted. And then we have to deal with the fact that if it's not in our code yet, how do we deal with it, right? That's kind of what's happening with House Bill 2001, except for luckily they told us that we could assume up to 3%. So they gave us a parameter, even though you may not have you'll have the code adopted, but you may not have any data associated with it yet. So, so yeah, long answer is yes, we should readdress anything that's applicable when we rerun it again.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah. That's a good flag. And does everyone know about that House Bill? I don't know if everyone here knows that there. Alexis, do you want to give a short summary of that?
Oh, yeah, I'll be real short. It's basically the middle housing that House Bill 2001 allowed is they, and I don't know what the mechanism is, but cities, I think it might be above 10,000, need to allow partitions of land for middle housing units. So a duplex could be broken into 2 lots instead of being on 1 lot. And so on for other middle housing types up to quadplexes and couch clusters.
Yes. And Alexis, I will just add that this came up at Planning Commission because right now is when we are actually, John and I both sit on it. We are actually going through the code. We started this week and we're actually doing that work. And this came up because it's like, well, okay, so now we have a new bill that we're going to be implementing. It'll have a little bit of a different timeline, but it's going to impact that. So there's a lot of changes that as I had that same question. So I'm glad that we're just kind of talking about it because I had exact same question as how does this work and this map, how will it be impacted by those the ability to someone to, you know, add 3 units of housing on their lot. So
and I think one piece of the implementation is that I think that for those curious about how do you subdivide a duplex, I think there's a 0 lot line, but that's a rather nuanced detail.
Yes. One of my questions I had along those lines, though, Heather, you just mentioned when we run this again, what does that mean? So what is that process? So
Yeah, so it's hard to keep all of these things straight. So right now we're in the monitoring process. And so at this point, and that's why we're referring so much back to the Envision Eugene assumptions, is we're trying to understand the assumptions we made compared to what is actually happening during our monitoring period. And one of the things that we thought we would do as part of that report to council is rerun the buildable lands inventory to get a good to get a sense of where the buildable lands inventory is compared to where it was. Well, it turns out because you know, there's enough things that are different with the data layers, you know, data that wasn't available that we used before and isn't available now, things like that, that have made it difficult for us to go, okay, here's our 2012 buildable lands inventory, here's our 2021 inventory, and that those are apples to apples. That isn't gonna work for us. What we're gonna have to do is actually look at the building permit data and see how many acres were developed with those building permits. And then so we can go, okay, here was our 2012 BLI, how many acres were developed with building permits? And that's actually, we would be doing that anyway. That was something that we want to do to keep a pulse on the inventory. But we still have this snapshot that Thea has put together for us. And so when we go to council and we give them the report, we will also be asking for direction to reanalyze our urban growth boundaries. So right now we're monitoring and giving a status report, but because of the new state legislation that requires us to do a new 20-year housing capacity analysis by 2026, we actually need direction from council to start on that, soon. And all of the work that we're doing right now will help feed into that, but we haven't actually started that work yet. And so as part of that, we will rerun this version of the buildable lands inventory. And then we can have those conversations about, is 1 acre for LDR the right threshold for partially vacant? Is that still right based on the monitoring data we've been collecting? Are there new statutes that are in effect that we need to wrap into the BLI that we didn't this time because they're not in effect yet, or we haven't adopted the code yet? And then there are new state rules about how you do your UGB analysis and your BLI that are different from when we did it last time. So we'll need to wrap those all in. So that's why I say we're going to do a new UGB. We'll bring, new BLI, too many acronyms, bring it up to date as much as possible, and then integrate the other things. It's kind of a moving target, frankly. Yeah. But that's kind of the process.
Okay. All right, I will move on to Mark.
Yes. Well, like you others, I also looked at the neighborhood where I live, and actually I live outside the urban growth boundary, and the urban growth boundary is right down my street. So the side I'm on is all blank with respect to BLI issues, but the other side has many subdivisions and some vacant land. And I took a look at a number of those. And I found myself wondering what the error rate is in the automated system that Thea and Heather and you all have developed. And by error rate, I think I mean there must be some correct value, and this system gives a number or a set of numbers. So then I wondered, how would we know the correct value? So I figured, all right, so we assemble 100 expert human beings, and the 100 expert human beings spend whatever, X years poring over all of the data lot by lot and come up with a buildable land inventory. And then you could compare the automated system to that 100 experts result and get a number. And you'd say, all right, well, we're off by 20% or 10% or whatever it may be. But then it also occurred to me that what we regard as buildable land is all a matter of drawing conclusions from existing statutes, I guess. And we make assumptions that are not cast in concrete. We have to do some guessing. And thus, there's not really, the 100 experts could not come up with a number. They would come up with a possibly reasonable or a likely reasonable number. Anyway, the upshot of all of this was wondering if the automated system were off by 20%, say. Well, no, first of all, how far off is it, number one? And number two, if it were off by, say, 20% or 10% or whatever number it is that's in the range of, I'm guessing, 10 to 20%, would that matter? And if it would matter, why would it matter? And am I guessing about why it might matter or might not matter? It has to do, that would have to do with decision makers in the future trying to decide about zoning and whatnot, depending on the buildable lands inventory number. And if that's what's going on, I doubt that a 10% or a 20% error on the system as a whole would matter. But in any case, what to me it comes down to is making an automated system that is as close as we can get it to what the 100 experts would choose to do. And so the bottom line question is, how close are we to that? And are we close enough? And if we are, then okay, we're done. And if we're not, what do we do about it in terms of the automated system? Because I don't think it's practicable for 100 experts to do it all by hand. Of course, it's not, and that's why we have an automated system. And it's not practicable for all of us on this committee to find all the errors. And so there's where we are. And so I guess what it comes down to is some of these bigger picture questions. How much error can we tolerate? And what are the considerations that surround that tolerance? So that's my question. For Thea and Heather, I guess. And whoever else has an answer, I don't know.
Do you want to start, Thea? I can add on.
So I can talk about maybe how much error we think there is in the model, and then pass it off to Heather. So initially we flagged anything that had conflicting information, and that returned almost 5% of lots saying something is off here and we don't know what it is. So we reviewed all of those. It was over 3,000 records that staff reviewed. However, because of the way the data is set up and because of how much we rely on assessor data, or the model does, and how the assessor goes out and tracks things based upon, so we've talked about this before, where if there are two lots that are adjacent to each other and they're owned by the same entity, many times the assessor will just assign all of the improvement value and the property class description to one of the lots. And that creates problems with our model. So in areas where we know this is happening and we tried to pay more attention when we were going back through manually reviewing. So this is areas where there are paved parking lots. We know that the model has some struggles in those because many times the assessor will assign all the value of that parking lot to whatever building is nearby. And if it's a larger lot and it spans the entire building and parking lot, then that's not a problem. But if it's a site that takes up 4 tax lots and the building only sits on one of them, then the likelihood is that the 3 tax lots that take up the parking lot will be misclassified according to the model. So we did try and pay attention to that, and also to single family homes or other buildings that span multiple lots. So the error rate is a little bit above 5%, but not that much. And that was just the initial error rate of the model, and we have cleaned that up significantly. We still know, based upon your review the past couple of weeks, there are still some outstanding issues that we are correcting as we find them. And we know that we're not going to have 100% of those corrected. But Heather can speak to that a little more about how we feel with being comfortable with what we have at this point.
Yeah, thanks, Thea. I think, Sue, you brought up something when we first started talking about the BLI methodology and how if we're using these data sources, can't we have them correct them, you know, and be more accurate to save some of this time? Because I don't know if you guys could hear Thea, but, you know, we reviewing 3,000 lots, and those were just ones that were flagged as conflicting. Since then, we have found some even that come up as vacant, like Thea was saying, but clearly there's, you know, a house or a parking lot was the example, you know, falling onto that part of the property. And so there is just going to end up being some manual review that's needed. Because we don't have, we've exhausted all the data sources We're using the best ones we can. You know, aerial photos are another good example. They're pretty expensive to fly. We get aerial photos as often as we can through a joint partnership with the other jurisdictions in the area, but there's some lag in that as well. And we rely on aerial photos a lot for looking at this data. So it's definitely a triage. You know, I think it is a good reminder, Mark, that so I really appreciate you asking the question of, it sounds like there is going to be some error, and I would say, yes, there is. And what we're trying to do is clean up the error to the best degree that we can, while also not doing a lot by lot review, because, you know, like Thea was saying, we've already looked at 3,000 lots. Yes, we did ask you guys to help us because we're doing a lot of stuff right now. We're doing data entry for building permits, for thousands of building permits. There's just a lot going on. And so, so we did ask for a little help, and it's also to get you comfortable with the buildable lands inventory, to feel like you understand it. You can communicate to your constituents and your neighbors about what is your comfort level with the buildable lands inventory, and just an acknowledgement that there is going to be some errors in it. And so with that, I would say, you know, we are doing comprehensive planning right now. We're doing 20-year planning with this buildable lands inventory. And so I think that if there is some comfort there in the fact that there is some error, and that there are going to be some mistakes, that there is just that reminder that the level of planning we're doing is pretty high. And yet we're using a buildable lands inventory that is very specific. And so somehow we have to find that right balance that is pretty good, you know, and I don't want to say 80-20, even though I say that a lot, the 80-20 rule. But there is something to that, because we really don't have the resources to go lot by lot. And even if we did, we would probably miss some things, just because of, like I said, our aerial photos were not from yesterday, you know, all of those kinds of things. So I appreciate, Thea, that you were able to say what percentage had the conflicting information. That is super helpful to know. I didn't remember that.
Well, I'm impressed to learn that it was as small as 5%. And I mean, that's a very useful kind of point to think about, and to have something specific, a real number to think about. And so that's great. I expected it to be more like 10 or 15%, but all right, 5%. So if suppose those 3,000 lots had not been reviewed, and the 5%, yeah, well, the 5% of conflict. Well, out of the 5% of conflict, that doesn't mean that all of those, that 5% resulted in a change relative to. I guess that's not what it means. Maybe Thea meant that. A change relative to what the automated system had produced, although some of those 5% would have produced a change, I guess. But in any case, whatever that may be, if we're down in the 5% range, does that matter for the 20-year planning horizon? That is a 5% error. Is that okay to live with for purposes of planning?
So that 5%, correct me if I'm wrong, Thea, that was where there was conflicting information. So the model didn't actually make a determination on development potential. We had to make it. Is that right?
Sometimes the model made a determination,
Okay.
but we said, hey, this needs review. And
Okay.
sometimes the information was so conflicting that the model said, we have no idea.
Okay.
Okay, I've got Ed and Sue in the queue, so I'll let them go, and then Lisa, I'll have you give us your comments after that. So I'm getting to you. Go ahead, Ed.
Okay, very short statement. I just wanted to say that I think we are very close to having the cleanest, most accurate BLI in the state of Oregon. And this BLI is going to be the
Does Ed freeze for everybody? Okay, Ed, you're frozen.
It's too bad. I really wanted to hear that.
I heard death start to come out of his mouth, so.
staff has done an outstanding job, and I think we ought to be proud of what we're going to have. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Sue, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I just want to mention that I just counted up the number of lots that I drove around late this afternoon, and it totals 14. I'm not counting the 15th one, which I own, which shows up on the map as being developable, which it is. And there's only one that I noticed that actually has a house on it and doesn't look like there's additional developable land. And I'll get to Thea about that later, but everything else looks really justified. Yes, there's one that's in a dead end alley or that doesn't have alley access, it's landlocked, but that's still development potential. So when I look at this in just my own neighborhood, there's a high level of accuracy, which I think is kind of astounding. And as I said, I'll get to Thea with the one that I think is developed already. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sue. Lisa, we're ready for you. There you go.
Unmute button, always a challenge. Yeah, although Ed cut out when he was speaking, I think what he was trying to say, and I would agree that this is just the most phenomenal model, and undoubtedly a lot of other cities will look to Eugene and want to borrow from Thea's work. So I've always said we're working with a fabulous team of staff on the Eugene Planning Department. So thank you for this work. People have said so much. I had two tiny little questions. If there's a home on I wouldn't say a large lot, but a sizable lot, and then when you click on it, it says I lost it already. Two buildable lots. Does that mean that despite the fact that there's a house and, like as Sue was saying, a garden on it, it could be it could be identified as divisible and made into two lots? Is that what it means? That makes sense. It's kind of an obvious question. I just want to make sure.
Do you have, do you know which specific lot said that?
It was on the corner of Friendly and 22nd. And now I can't get it back. I don't have an address.
Let me share my screen and direct me to it.
You're kind of fading out again a little bit, Thea, as far as volume level.
Okay. I don't know why I disabled every other microphone prior to this, but Lisa, could you tell me which lot it is?
Hold on, okay, I'll give you another one. 345 West 21st Avenue. So it says that there, I finally found it, number of building footprints on lot 2. And it has, a house and then garden. But if it says 2 building footprints, does that mean under, House Bill 2020 or, with the buildable lands inventory, that it could be subdivided into 2 lots for housing?
So what it means if it says number of use this layer called Eugene building footprints. And that was just where staff drew a shape for every building that they saw. And so the model just went through and counted up the number of buildings on the lot. It doesn't mean that it could be a house and a shed. It could be a house in the garage that's standalone. It could be 2 separate single family homes, or it could be a home and a building that has been recently demolished. But it doesn't mean we're saying it's how many buildings could fit on a lot, just that that's how many there are in the data set that we were using.
Mhm. And by the way, the lot that you have on your screen share, that also came up when I put in that address, but that is not the right address and not the right location. So it's an error. 345. Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay, never mind. It was 456 West 21st Avenue that had the 2 footprints, but I understand now. I thought footprint was referring to potential room for another home, and could be a lot could be divided for building a second home. Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of the opposite. It's one of the data sets that helps us flag that there's development on the property.
Okay. And then the other question is, under protected lands, if there's land that is used as a unofficial community park, so it's not a park managed or owned by the city, but it's a park that has been purchased by the neighbors like Madison Meadow. I saw that came up as developable, but I think it's has an easement on it, or like some sort of conservation easement. Would your program catch that?
So we got a list from the assessor of active recognized conservation easements within the county. And we did say that if a property had a conservation easement, then it was not considered development.
Oh, I lost your last 4 words. Sorry, you're very mushy. I think it might be your microphones.
So if a property had an active conservation easement, it was not considered developable.
Okay. So either it's a mistake or they haven't gotten the proper paperwork.
It's probably that they haven't gotten the proper paperwork or filed it, because there are tax implications associated with recognized conservation easements from the county.
Thank you. Well, those are just my questions. I just, like everyone else, explored around and found it pretty phenomenal. Thank you.
Okay. Alexis has his hand up. You go ahead and then I'll share my thoughts.
So Lisa's question brought up something in my mind. When I went through and started looking at addresses I was familiar with, one of my friends just moved into 4675 Manzanita Street, which is off of Amazon. And there's 2 vacant lots next to him. And when I went to visit him on this first day that he moved in just a week ago, he's like, yeah, and the 2 lots next door are vacant and they're not going to be developed. And I was like, oh, really? And so he talked about that there's some sort of like drainage easement on them, and they're not conservation easements. And I was wondering if and he says that his realtor told them that they would be undeveloped because of that. And they showed up as undeveloped on the map and not constrained. And I was wondering if the other non-conservation easements that would prohibit development are figured into this, or if that's just too difficult.
Good question. So we can take a closer look at those two specific lots that you mentioned and dig into it. We did try and capture as many of those as possible. So many of them are actually listed as classified by the assessor as unbuildable according to the property class description. And so we were able to identify many of them that were unbuildable because they have some sort of wastewater easement or sewage easement, or they are considered a common area for multifamily. But we do know that it's probably not capturing all of those across the city.
And I will add that we didn't use that information last time in the buildable lands inventory, but that assessor unbuildable data set or classification was actually really helpful. And we did some spot checking to try to figure out what they were identifying as non-buildable and the sizes and all of those things. And it actually ended up being really helpful. But yeah, unless the assessor classifies it, we don't have that level of detail for, like, you know, all the subdivisions and partitions and things like that, where there's those kinds of requirements.
Okay, that's super helpful. Do you guys mind if I share my screen to ask my question? Because I think it might be a little easier. So, like many of you, first thing I did was go to my neighborhood. And I think because I live in an area where there's a tremendous amount of building happening, just because that's just where it's all happening. I mentioned this in that context because I would not assume that any other part of town would represent what I'm about to like ask about. But this whole area here, that's a lot of, whoa, I don't know how that happened. Boy, moved it. Sorry. This whole area, okay, I'm not sure how I did that. Wait a second. Okay, going back in. This area is almost entirely built out at this point. And as is this golf course over here, which is showing nothing there, you know, just nothing unusual. It's not yellow, it's not, but it has all been replaced with dense housing. So I can also speak to all of this because this is closer to where I live and all of this. So I guess my question is there a way to cross-reference whether it's building permits or something like that at the time? Because I know that the time when you are taking this snapshot is going to be different from the time that we're actually trying to get a more accurate. So I just didn't know if that was at all helpful. I would not assume that most areas of town are growing like this and that there's so much building going on. So it's probably not super critical, but it was something I noticed. And the other thing that I did notice was that I went to look for my address, and while my house exists on here and it is definitely it is there, and when you pull it up and when I click on it, I was able to pull it up. It doesn't show that I can search it, so I couldn't find it. And I did the same thing for the area around me, all the neighbors, and none of their addresses. So it says that the address was created in 2017, which is true. So I just didn't know how far behind it is, because that's a few years behind, and I just didn't know, you know, what that. But when I go to click on the actual house, it's there, and it says the address, and all the information is there. So I just didn't know if there was just a lapse in the you know, the system. But okay, here, I'll stop sharing. But that was mostly that, and I noticed that there's a lot of swimming pools in my neighborhood, and I'm gonna have to start making some new friends because But anyhow, that was really, it's hard because when you're not familiar with other areas of town, the best you can do is just kind of poke around. But I have no familiarity with most. I looked at my old neighborhood, which is where the question about the tax lots being county versus city came up, in thinking about that, because I used to live in Santa Clara. But other than that, it is incredibly detailed. I was super impressed. Like, this is a lot of work. So I echo everybody's comments, that this is an amazing tool. So
Yeah, I just wanted to respond. I don't know if you were planning to about the lag, and so there's always a little bit of lag in the data. And so the assessor data that we are relying heavily on gets certified towards the end of the year. And so having a really clean date to start counting building permits against a buildable lands inventory is super helpful. I'm finding out, given what we're going through right now, where the effective date of our buildable lands inventory was May 20th of 2013. And then, actually it was run in 2012, and then we brought it up to date. Ed, you might remember that, with address points, trying to bring it as up to date as possible, but we didn't actually rerun it, which caused its own set of issues. So we're trying to change some of the things that we learned from last time, not repeat things that make it more difficult to monitor development. So the buildable lands inventory that we're looking at, the data is as good as it can be up to January 1 of this year. And so a lot of those permits that you're talking about are not reflected in the assessor data. They're not on the aerial photo. That's what you were seeing. And so what we will do is when we bring you the building permit information, we will also separate out the ones that were issued as of January 1st, 2021. And then that will, in essence, bring the buildable lands inventory up to date. So we'll be able to say, yes, there was, 500 acres up here, but actually that's all developed now. So that comes off the table. So yeah, that's a really good point, because that is an area that has a lot of capacity that is actually developed now.
yeah. Well, that was my main question. So I have John in the queue. John Borowski, go ahead.
Thank you. So I have a question, and then I also have a comment, kind of going back to Howard's. What is our percentage that we're off? Error percentage. It seems to me, and I'm not proclaiming that we should do this, but when they do audits, let's say you do an audit, financial audit, they'll go through and just take a certain percentage of receipts and audit those receipts. I mean, if we're really wanting to look at that, we could say, let's take 100 homes or 100 lots from each ward, or whatever you want to do, disperse it about, and then dig into each parcel specific. And then we could say, okay, we found this percentage of error. And I don't know what the scientific number would be that you would have to do to make that scientifically reasonable thing. But that would be something that if it really got down to it, I think that would be a way to address that and say, okay, we found 1% error citywide on what it did. So that's that. The question that I have is, when you click in on one of these lots and it says plan designation, is that the Metro Plan designation, or is that a city designation?
It's the Metro Plan designation.
If I can just clarify, it's the Metro Plan designation. We don't have a parcel specific Metro Plan map.
That's what I'm getting.
Yeah, so it is an approximation of the plan designation, because you have to base your buildable lands inventory on plan designation. So we had to write some rules to give properties a plan designation. So it is, and we even said on the last buildable lands inventory that those plan designations are not adopted. Because it's not the official plan designation map is our 11/17 that's in the Metro plan, and any site specific changes after that. So I just have to always throw in that little caveat.
Well, and that's where I'm going to, because I see this tool that we have here, and I see a project on the work plan that's been on the planning department's work plan for eight years now to do a parcel specific Metro plan diagram. And so I think that this would be a really great tool to integrate into that process. It would make it very, very much easier. And I'm sure that that's something that'll happen when and if that project ever moves forward. Because what we have here is just great. And you could pull up, the 11/17 and say, okay, these are areas, because there's only probably about, I don't know, few hundred properties that kind of straddle the line that would have to be looked at. So I would look forward to using this information for that next project.
Okay, there are no other hands in the queue. So, oh, Ed, you had your hand and then you
Yeah.
unraised. Go ahead.
Well, I raised my hand first and then Heather just stole the words right out of my mouth, so I lowered it. No problem. And I just want to say I do have 3 questions when the time's appropriate. Now? Okay. Are we adjusting the buildable land inventory any because of the new landslide data that we have in the South Hills?
It is not incorporated into the BLI right now, because we have no, right there, because it hasn't been adopted. We don't have any regulations adopting what happens with that landslide area yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But any of regulations that did, I know that FEMA is like relooking at floodplain boundaries. Those are also areas that we consider protected. And so, as those things get updated and officially adopted, we can work them into the BLI.
Okay. And then in the future, we'll be having a discussion about slope to land. State law saying 25% is considered constrained and us using 30. I was wondering, is there any way that we can get the amount of acreage of the buildable land inventory that is between 25 and 30%? I'm wondering if this is even a big deal or not.
You give me a couple minutes, I can look up the number of lots that have a predominant slope classification of 25 to 30%.
Okay. And can you go even further and figure out how much in that group has been developed since our last inventory? Wow, I'm so impressed.
I can tell you how much is listed as developed currently according to
Right. Okay. But last question, after talking to Thea today, I finally realized that when you look at all the yellow on the map that's considered undeveloped, that's not really the total undeveloped land. Like for instance, in Santa Clara, there's a big yellow strip, but when you put the Go 5 layer over it, a good part of it's covered. And the little part that was left was so small that there'll be no density on it. So that made me think, kind of like what John was talking about with audits and everything, some statistical sampling. I think it'd be interested to know the total number of acres of purple that's on the map, and then the total number of acres that are actually partially vacant. Because right now you'll have a purple strip and the back side's partially vacant. The front side has a facility or something on it that isn't included in the total partially vacant acres. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so you're looking for the acres that we're actually gonna count capacity on.
Compared to the total purple that's on the map, yeah.
Yeah,
I think that'd be a very interesting percentage to take a look at. That's it for me.
Yeah. Go ahead, Heather.
Thea, were there any, so Phil and Kevin aren't here, and they did provide some comments. Was there anything that they commented on that was kind of a common theme that you heard from other people, or things that folks here that we haven't talked about that would be helpful for the group to hear? Because I think there is more work to do. There is more cleanup that we can do. And, I'd like to go ahead and do that. And so if there's some other things that were identified that we can kind of keep working on, that we could bring up with this group and let them know so that you guys know what we're doing.
So there were a few things. So there was some, I know we touched on this last time, but there was some, concern about the threshold size for partially vacant industrial land, and that it was too high. That for industrial lands, sometimes they just have one house on them, or they'll have what appears to be 6 vacant acres aside from one building. So that was a common theme with what I heard from people, is that they thought certain lots should be switched from developed to partially vacant because they had land. It was below what we consider partially vacant for industrial. And then another common theme was sort of the idea of wanting to capture what is known in the development pipeline and incorporate that into the buildable land inventory. But as Heather mentioned, we really want, this is meant to be a snapshot in time, and we really want to keep that clean, effective date of what was the status of that lot as of January 1st, 2021.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, with respect to LDR and that 1 acre threshold to even be considered or looked at for partially vacant, the same with the industrial, we use that 10 acre cutoff for a number of reasons, but with the idea that if we're trying to compare apples to apples as much as we can, we're keeping those thresholds the same. And then when we rerun the buildable lands inventory again, we can adjust those thresholds. And some of what I would expect that we would adjust things like for is some of the things that I would expect we would adjust would be because of building permit data that we're going to be bringing to you that should help inform things like what is the right threshold for partially vacant. And then also there may be new provisions in the OARs regarding how we do our BLI and urban growth boundary analysis that are different than the last time we did it. And so we'll want to incorporate those, or at least consider them. If there are things that aren't required, but that are suggestions, we'll want to talk about those. So I think that's just a reminder that there is going to be more opportunity for changing our methodology. So do folks feel like, are you all comfortable that we've heard, if it's all right, Tiffany, I'd like to just kind of get a sense from the group that, you know, we've heard you, there wasn't enough time. And I apologize for that. Thanks for doing as much as you could to today's meeting. We are scheduled to meet July 15th. And in theory, we would be bringing you building permit data. So that schedule was contingent upon two things, or that topic being assigned to that meeting. And last time we went through the calendar of kind of backing up if we get the growth monitoring report to council at the end of the year, back that up because of, you know, wanting to send it to planning commission, wanting you guys to have several meetings to review the growth monitoring report. All of a sudden, the report is basically due to you guys by August 19th, which means we need internal review to review it. So hence a little bit of the short timelines that is going on, and maybe a little bit of frazzledness on the part of staff, or at least for me. And so, yeah, I mean, you back that up and it's like 6 months, you know, to get it through kind of the whole process, because we want to make sure that you have enough time to really dig into the report. So as I talked about last time, I scheduled, I think, at least three, maybe four as a tentative meeting to really go through the report. And you've seen a lot of the charts, but ideally we would look at the building permit charts ahead of the report, and then the report brings everything together. So the July 15th was my hope. It's still my hope. So I'd like you guys to hold that date still. The good news is that the software program that we have been developing for the past couple of years, and have been testing and developing and tweaking and all of these things to track building permit data in the way that we need it to, has launched. So that is very exciting. And now we are in the process, as I mentioned last time, of actually inputting the data that couldn't automatically be pulled in from other sources. And so those are things like how much development, how many acres is this development really developing? And allocating that by use. So, you know, Tiffany, I think about the area you were pointing out where there's a bunch of apartments going in. They're different sizes. Some of them are 1 to 4 unit apartments. Some of them might be 20 plus. There's a clubhouse. All of that has to be allocated appropriately so that you're saying that, you know, this type of housing is taking up this much land, needed this much land to develop. Anyway. So we're in the thick of it and we're doing that. It is very slow going. And anytime you launch software, there are bugs. And so we have to fix those bugs, and that may require re-entering data, stopping, entering data, all of these things. So this is all new for me. Those of you that have dealt with software, I mean, I'm enjoying it. It's also like a bit nerve-wracking. And so I am still hopeful that we will be able to bring charts to you July 15th. I would not be surprised if we're not able to do that. It is possible that the building permit charts, we could bring them to you fresh off of the printer, so to speak, the virtual printer, and just bring them to you at the meeting. Instead of sending them to you ahead of time. And then you would know that you would have more time to look at those, because we are tentatively scheduled for August 5th and August 19th. But somewhere in there, the report has to get written. And so, so I just kind of wanted to give you a heads up on kind of what's happening with the schedule, why we are asking for for your time while it's sunny out and asking for multiple meetings is because we are really trying to meet this deadline and also give you enough time to review the report, because it is going to be meaty. It is pulling everything together. And the kicker is going to be, what does it all mean? Once you pull everything together, what does it all mean? And we really haven't had that conversation yet because we haven't pulled everything together. So, so anyway, that's kind of what I'm forecasting. And I'd like in the background of all that for us to keep cleaning up the buildable lands inventory with some of the things that we have continued to find and that you all have brought to us. And we can look for those same things elsewhere, you know, some of those properties that are actually not vacant and look like they're vacant, but when you zoom in further, you're able to find them. And then hopefully we will have a pretty good version. I would like to have that by July, you know, mid-July. I think that July 15th meeting would be a good time to have the final version of the BLI. So anyway, that's kind of the update and the timeline and what's going on.
Okay. Heather, at the beginning, Ed had mentioned having a couple folks with the home builders take a look at the map. Is that something that you're comfortable with? Because I think it might be helpful if we're kind of looking to identify areas. I think, you know, we all kind of went right to our neighborhoods and the areas that we know. And if we had a few more people that are really familiar, I think that I could see that could be useful. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it'd be great, Ed, if you coordinate with them and then maybe you can funnel the questions to Thea so that you're in the know of kind of what's going on and you can have that conversation. Yeah, that would be great. It would be great if we can, I don't know what timeline they're thinking about. Yeah, so we can talk offline about that, about what you think is realistic.
Well, we have gotten through our.
John has his hand up.
Hand up. Okay, go ahead, John.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that what you laid out sounds good. All of the things that we've been looking at, we could always go back and look at more, right? That's what we found with when we did the last Envision Eugene. It was kind of like, oh, stop, look at this. And if you look at this, then you can look back at this. And if you look back at this, you can look back at this. I myself am very comfortable with the work that's been done on the BLI to date. You know, what you guys have done is absolutely amazing in my opinion. Having a few more eyes look at it and send it out, I think is good. But I think we also need to just kind of say, okay, this is what we've got for now. We can look at it more as things go on and move on to the next phase, which is going to be the building permits. And those are going to take a lot of time to look at, but we're basically getting to that report, right? And that's when it's going to really take some time to say, okay, we've got building permits, we've got percentage of low, you know, what is the percentage of multifamily to single families? We've got all of these questions that we were hoping to answer with monitoring. And so the more time that we have to look at that, I think will behoove the council the best. You know, if we can have a strong recommendation that yes, we trust these numbers and this is what you have to base your policy decisions on, that I think that's the best thing that we can give. So, you know, a few more days or weeks, whatever, to look at this BLI methodology, I don't have a problem with, but I'm ready to say, let's dig into the permits. Let's dig into the other information that we're going to have so that we can get this to council by the end of the year. I think that staff has done a fabulous job and we can always keep going and looking back and finding a specific piece of property that we may have missed. But overall, I think you guys have done a great job.
Thanks, John. Sue has her hand up. Go ahead, Sue.
Yeah, I want to echo John's comments and just say that, I think it's important to have perspective on the time that has led up to this point already. It's been something like 9 or 10, maybe 12 years of working towards this point. I think it's really important that we continue to ask questions and we probe and and query as much as we need to, but also that we need to keep the process moving, because if we don't, we will not make any progress. And I'm really excited about the fact that we are at this point right now, getting close to that final report. And I would hate to see us get stopped right now, trying to have perfection when perfection is never going to happen. Not giving up, doing the best we can, because I think that's really important. But I have so much confidence in the staff and their motivation and their drive and their skills in doing what they're doing, that I want to really keep this process moving. I think it's very important to do at this point, especially at this point.
Thank you, Sue. Okay, anybody else? I don't have any other hands. Ed McMahon, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm considering a GoFundMe page for staff to make sure they have an adequate supply of Red Bull.
Oh, man. All right, Ed, you're on it. Your task. Well, I don't have, oh, Alexis.
Yeah, just to add onto that train, I want to say that I've only been with 1,000 Friends for about 3.5 years, but I've never seen any other city do this level of detail, and I think it's really impressive. So just wanted to add that in.
Thank you. Okay. 7:04, wondering if there's anything else keeping us from the sunshine out there, or if y'all want to keep making comments. That's what we're here for, so feel free. But if not, I think we could probably cut it short tonight. So anybody object to adjourning our meeting for this evening? Okay. No objections. So I will go ahead and dismiss you all. Meeting adjourned. Thank you so much for spending your evening with us, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you, guys.